All right, after the glue dried, I sanded down all these edges to get this as perfect as possible. Actually, the glue joints were nice and tight, but I just sanded that edge down so it's almost perfectly seamless. And then sanded this top edge, and then sanded the intersections here in the corners. So I'm going to be wrapping with this kind of this gold metallic material. So the metallic materials will show all these imperfections. So I'm going to try to do this as clean as possible. So I started gluing this on. It's relatively thin and it's kind of pulpy on the back. So I'm trying to do this one with wet glue. I did some other tutorials where I used the twin tack, and that works pretty well, but it's not very forgiving. The twin tack, once you make contact, you cannot move it. You can't slide anything around or make any adjustments. So that is challenging in itself, but it works really well. For our mock-ups, it adheres to the material very well. In production, they do use wet glues because it really fuses to the pulpy material of the chipboard. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. For our mock-ups, we're okay. So I'm gonna try this with wet glue and see how it works. It's okay, it's not bad. It's just, it shows through a little bit until it dries, so it's okay. So I have that glued on. I'm gonna finish gluing this into position. Talking about the substrates, I did do a little test. I just took some of this and kind of glued it to a piece of chipboard. So always check your material, because it really depends on what you're using. If it's even a fabric, the glue might ooze through, so you might wanna back it up with something. So there's a lot of variables on trying to do that, so you have to experiment a little bit. So that's the tray. I'm just gonna show wrapping that tray today. So what I do is I create it's almost like a die line of what my wrap parts will look like. This is just printed on a piece of paper, and I calculated all these tabs that I'm gonna use to roll over the edge, and I drew the lines for the part. And this is the piece that's gonna wrap around. So I used to use a repositionable spray mount, and I sprayed this and I put it on the back of the gold material, and then I cut out, and then I'm pulling it off this time. I'm not keeping it on there. So I have my gold material trimmed and ready to go. And even though I did all my calculations and my measurements, I still make a test. You know, bring it over here, see how things are gonna line up. And I did make some subtle adjustments, you know, trim things down a little bit, and I checked to see how this is gonna work. Because once I put the glue on this, it's go time. So I'm gonna wrap that right around there and roll over all those tabs. So in this situation, I'm going to roll the tabs on the top. I'm going to roll the tabs to the bottom, and then I'm going to cap off the bottom with a half round. So I just have this here. I'm going to trim this out. So again, I used the repositional spray mount and I put that on the back. I did do a tutorial where I permanently put the backing material on with double stick on a different piece of paper that was even a little bit thinner than this. So I sort of backed it up with the twin tack and the paper with the die line on it, and then I took that and I wet glued that into position. So that worked pretty well. So here I was going to try to wet glue this without any backing material to see how it was going to work. So we'll see. On these smaller surfaces it worked pretty well. I'm not sure about a big surface like this. We'll have to see how that's going to go. Okay, so that brings me right up to my edge. Yeah, it's not bad. Okay, so that will go on last. So I'm just going to finish up gluing these little tabs. So what I have discovered with this material, just a little bit of glue, not too much. Bring that around. So that gives our corner a nice roll by doing that. All these overlapped edges work really well. Since this paper is so thin, when I back up other pieces of material over these tabs, we probably won't even see them. That's one of the telltale signs of a rigid box. You can see the tabs that get folded over. They will show up through the other material. And since this is also very thin, it will, my tolerance with my other part, which I was really concerned width on this one is not going to be very drastic at all. So I might have to make some other compensations for that part. So I do have this top edge here. I'm going to get some glue on this top edge so that adheres really well. There's my pivot point in there that I'm going to cover. And we'll push that through later. So I'm keeping the glue kind of light. So this, I really want that to stick on that top edge. And I'm going to wrap that right around. So I got that nice thick edge there. That looks really good. This paper wraps very nicely. Some papers that are really thick, or fabrics, they kind of pillow a little bit and roll around the edges, and they create quite a thickness, and it's not so crisp. But since this is so thin and I didn't back it up, and I'm just using the wet glue, it's really quite nice. So there's always these compromises in doing some of these. So that's good. It came around the corner very nicely. Okay. So that's going to dry. So this is the next one. I have a subtle little detail. I left it. I have my little miters and 45-degree angles on here. That's going to become critical when I roll these last tabs here. I might make a couple of adjustments after I glue this into position. I kind of like to do those last little cuts after I've glued it. I drew these pencil lines on the back here where that fold's going to be. And that's going to be a guide for me visually. When I pull this around, I want that to line up as accurately as I can. And I pulled this edge away slightly, cut that back on both ends, keep that really clean. So that looks like that'll work. Okay, so I'm just double checking here. All right, so this is going to take a moment. Okay, so that's ready to go. I'm just going to put that down that way. And I'm going to put the glue on here. Again, I'm not going to put too much on. Because I think what it's doing is it's actually soaking through the substrate on that metallic gold. It's like a backing paper on there. And it soaks right through. I need to be careful. So I'm not adding glue, I'm just sort of spreading it out with the nozzle here. I'm keeping this pretty light. Okay. So the starting point is pretty critical. So I'm going to get that right on center, and I'm pulling it away from the edge. Just a little bit. Pull that back a little more. Okay, so I'm going to check my pencil lines, make sure that I'm as centered as possible. Okay, just looking down at those lines. That looks good. Little wrinkling here because I'm twisting that slightly. Okay. That should hold. And I'm going to keep that accurate. Okay, it ended up just about where I had calculated, so that's good. It's a good sign. So I'm just going to roll that like this, apply some pressure on there. So also when the wet glue, before it dries, and if it is very pulpy paper, the paper will get kind of gooey and kind of mush around. So I'm just going to make sure it's as flat as I can. And then of course as it dries and the moisture leaves the paper, it tends to shrink slightly. So that's when it pulls in nice and tight. So again, the wet glue, I'm seeing a little bit of my tab. It's not bad though. Some of these tabs really show up. Okay, So that looks pretty good. So the next step is these are all going to get rolled over. I'll demonstrate some of these because it is a little time consuming, but that looks pretty good. So we are going to see tiny little cut marks in between these tabs on this top edge. That's just the nature of the process. Okay, not bad. And down here will be a little bit different. These are just going to fold in and go on this surface. And then like I had mentioned, that'll be capped off. So I'll do some of these just to demonstrate this process. Okay, I'm going to keep just a little bit of glue. I don't want to use too much. We'll do a few at a time. Okay, so I have those little cuts in between, so the material is touching itself. It's not overlapping. Because if we did overlap them, then we would see them. They would kind of build up and create a thickness. That would probably be... Do I have glue on that one? Oh, this one doesn't have glue. Here's the glue here. Okay. Keep track of which ones I put the glue on. Okay, so it's a really nice rolled edge. It's because I really sanded it, made it as crisp as possible. So all those imperfections can be seen. Okay, so this is going to take a little bit more. It's going to come around this top edge. So let's just add a little glue. Make sure it glues on that top edge. You know, it's hard to see what I'm doing here. I'm getting a little bit of glue, a little bit more than before, so it glues to the top edge of that cardboard. I do want that to happen. So I did just these three. Just kind of squishing it in there, getting the glue on that edge. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's the process. That looks pretty clean right there. I'm going to see little cut marks in there, but it's not bad. And it'll just be the same thing all the way around. The unique part here will be this one on this corner here. So I have a little bit too much material. So I'm going to kind of just eyeball this a little. I'm going to pull my 45 in. I'm going to do this by hand. Take a little bit more off of the tab, and I'm going to bring that 45 in a little bit further. Let's see how that's going to look. All right, I know this is really hard to see, but I have a little cut edge there. It comes up to this tab. And that tab will get glued inside. I kind of want to keep that as tight as possible. Might have to take a little bit more material out, or just sort of squish the material around so it sits in that corner nice and tight, which is what I think I'm going to do. Since the material is thin and it kind of gets a little bit squishy, so I didn't bring the glue up enough. So this is starting to peel up here a little. I'm going to add... Might get a little messy. I'm just going to add a little bit of glue in there. So I get that. I really want those edges to be nice and tight and adhered. But it does make the glue squeeze out. So that's good. I got it in there. It's not too much squeezing it out. So that'll hold. Those little edges that are by the corners, they start to peel up. Doesn't look as nice. So this one, it's just a slight peel up here in this little corner. Let's get a little bit in there. Okay. Okay, it's good. So now it'll be matter of, this is the one I trimmed. So I'll just demonstrate this end piece here. We can talk about the next phase. Okay. So I'm just going to try to grab that, pull that really nice and tight on this edge here, and then get that to go to the inside. So it's all about craftsmanship, taking time to do these. Because at the end, when it's all done, it is worth it. Makes it really nice and clean. Okay. So this corner, look, these corners are very critical, both of those. And then the rest of it is the same process. That's a little easier to do. And I'll do that on the bottom. And then when that's all done, I will glue this on, which will finish off everything. It's also good with the thin material. We're not going to see much of an edge, as long as I get that glue down nice and tight. So once this is all assembled with the bottom, the inside will be finished by whatever kind of insert that I'm going to put in here. I could put another wall of material if it was going to be left open. If I have an insert that's going to accommodate some products, I would make that insert. Maybe it's a black part or something like that. And that might go in here and cover up all these tabs, and that would actually create my finish. So there are a couple of options there, and they're all good. It just depends on what this would be used for ultimately. I will just poke a little hole through the paper to find my centers. I'll measure strategically and get that in there and put my pin in and get that prepared. But I'm going to talk about the next step, and what I'm going to do, and I'll have that ready for the next tutorial, is have these outside panels. I cut these, and I compensated quite drastically for the thickness of the material and the wrap. Now, since this is so thin, I am probably going to cut this down a little bit. I had a little extra. I think I overcompensated because I want that to be snug, but not too snug, because this part is going to sit in here and rotate inside of this. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. That's why I'm going to take my time. Once I get this all glued and assembled, I will now put that on here, and I'll make some final calculations and estimates about how much space I want. I might even put the pin in there, see how the pivot's working, checking it all out before I make this commitment. Because I am going to make this assembly very similar to how I made the other one, but this one's going to be open here, and I'm going to glue these pieces to this edge independently without any front wall. So I'll do my bent lamination in this fashion. So I'll show that in the next tutorial when we continue this process.